not drunk, going out and jacking soldiers that are drunk and sleeping. How, to what degree do you find this heroic and acceptable behavior? Nicias, however, will say to his young friend right before he leaves at 375, the moment calls, here's the way, you keep guard at our back, take care of my back, so no patrol can attack us from the rear. You be on the alert, hawk's eye all around. I'll make a slaughter, cut you a good clean swath, and off he goes. And he just starts killing all kinds of people. The first one he kills, Raminus, is a prophet. He beheads this guy, like Dolan is beheaded by Odysseus and Diomedes. He's like a starved lion raging through crowded pens at line 395 or so, right? But we're told Eurylius does bloody work as well. The man's on fire storming down, we're told. He kills all kinds of people as well. And then finally at line 411, Nicias will say to him, call it quits, the dawn's at hand, our old foe, enough revenge, we've hacked a path through enemy lines, enough. And so they get ready to leave. Eurylius, however, he picks up Messapus's helmet, an enemy that he's killed, and he puts on the helmet and the armor. And we're told at line 433, the helmet Eurylius forgot. It glints in the dark. It gives him away. It's caught in a shaft of moonlight, and then a sight not lost on Vulcan's, one of the Latine's great warriors, shouting out from the vanguard. He tells them to stop. They're caught in the woods. Nicias, however, will get away, and Eurylius will be the only one that's caught. However, we're told, at line 450, he says it. He looks back for his lost friend. We think, of course, of Aeneas looking back for Creusa, don't we, in the Troy story. And he says it, my poor Eurylius, where did I lose you? Where can I find you now? Nicias, we're told, already picks his way, wheeling, groping back through the whole deceptive wood, retracing, scouring his tracks through the silent bush. We're told, by the way, that Eurylius loses his way through fear, and he's in the darkness, and that's how he gets caught. The next moment, a cry hits his ears, and look, Eurylius, caught by the full band, undone by the dark, the place, the treachery. And the obvious question in line 460 is, what can Nicias do? He prays his heart out, we're told. And to that degree, he's ready to give up his life for his friend. He throws spears. He kills Sulmo at 475. And this is kind of really brutal language, the way that the hissing goes through the brows of the next kill. Tagus splitting his head wide open. And the warm brains, we're told, at 483. And for that, we're told that the Vulcans, the leader of the Rutilians, he says, I've had enough of it, and he kills Eurylius. Before he kills him, though, or as he's killing him, Nicias will step out, and he says at line 490, me, I'm here, he says, I did it. Turn your blades on me, Rutilians. He's ready to sacrifice his life for his friend. The crime's all mine, he never dared, could never do it. I swear by the skies up there, the stars, they know it all. All he did was love his unkindly friend too well. But we're told that Volsinus will stab Eurylius, and we're told that it's amazing poetry that Eurylius, he stabs him in the ribs, cleaving open his white chest. He writhes in death, and then we have this amazing epic simile. As blood flows over his shapely limbs, his neck droops, sinking over his shoulder, limp as a crimson flower cut off by a passing plow that droops as it dies. Or frail as poppies, their necks weary, bending their heads when a sudden shower weighs them down. In other words, like flowers that start to droop. So, we're told Nicias, he just storms the thick of them, out for Volscens. You've seen this in movies, right, of course. He's killing everybody. He goes up to Volscens. He sinks his blade, right, at line 508. He sinks his blade into Volscens' screaming mouth. And then Nicias, dying just as he stripped his enemy of his life, riddled with wound on wound, he threw himself on his lifeless friend, and there in the still of death, found peace at last. And then the line, how fortunate, both at once. And then Virgil says, if my songs have any power, clearly they do, the day will never dawn that wipes you from the memory of the ages, not while the house of Aeneas stands by the Capitol's rock unshaken, not while the Roman father rules the world, right? In other words, this is a story that will be retold and retold. And of course, no question it was. The Rutilians gather their armor. They cannot believe the massacre at line 520. Dawn comes on. Turnus will have at line 530 different mixed accounts of what happened in the night slaughter, because obviously part of this is because his soldiers were not prepared. Then at line 531, they impale the heads on brandished pikes, the heads a grisly sight, and strut behind them, baiting them without Christ, Aurelius and Nisus. In other words, they cut off the heads, they stick it on sticks. We're going to see this, by the way, when we do our Shakespeare's Macbeth. Macbeth will do this at the end of the play. Macduff will do this to Macbeth. It's a form of psychological warfare. But we're told at line 541, in 542, in a powerful set of lines, that moment, rumor flown through the shaken camp wings the news to the ears of Euryalus' mother. Suddenly, warmth drains from her grief-stricken body. The shuttles flung from her hand she was weaving. The yarn unravels. I mean, it's brilliant poetry. She lets the yarn that she was working with fall, and it unravels. Of course, the metaphor, the symbolism is clear here, right? Off she flies, poor thing, shrilling a mother's cry, and she wails in mourning. You, is this you I see, Aurelius? You, the only balm of my old age, how could you leave me all alone? By the way, these are echoed lines actually by Penelope, who will say something very similar about Telemachus, only obviously Telemachus isn't actually dead. Couldn't your mother have you said, she says, so cruel, how could you leave me all alone when you set out on that deadly mission? Couldn't your mother have said some last farewell? What heartbreak now you lie in an unknown land, fresh game for the dogs and the birds of Latium. Nor did your own mother lead her son's cortege, or seal your eyes in death, or bathe your wounds, or shroud your round in a festive robe I wore, speeding the work for you. By the way, this is the language as well of Hecuba about her dead son Hector, no question. And she asks it, where can I go? What patch of ground now holds your body, cut to pieces, your mutilated corpse? This head, it's all you bring back, my son? It's all that I followed, crossing land and sea? Stab me through if you have any decency left. Whip all your lances into me, you reptilians. Kill me first with steel. Oh, pity me, you great father of gods, and whirl this hated body down to hell with a bolt. The only way I know to burst the chains of this brutal life. Of course, this is going to make for Turnus the great villain that he obviously has to be. We're told that, yeah, this is these whales are going to break these men on the battlements. They can't. I mean, it's a powerful picture. She kind of falls and faints. They cradle her in their arms. It's powerful stuff, right? We then will have the attack of the ramparts. They do this in tortoise formation at line 580. We've got lots of throwing of boulders. Remember, these guys have, they fortified the walls of Troy, we're told, so they know how to do this. We had lots of boulder throwing in the Iliad, didn't we? We'll remember this, right? And then at line 600, Virgil, for the third time in this poem, will call on the muse of, this time, Calliope epic poetry. Inspire me as I sing. What carnage and death the sword of Turnus spread that day. What men each fighter speeded down to darkness. Come, help me unroll the massive scroll of war. It's a compelling word picture, right? The scroll, it's a big scroll and all the names of the people who die. Of course, we immediately think of any kind of monument where the dead are, all their names are listed. The Vietnam War Memorial comes to mind. For those of you who have Google this, if you ever get to Okinawa, there's a famous peace park there where all of the dead of both sides are listed. It's truly compelling. One of the more amazing things you'll ever see. We think about that, when we think about that, the massive scroll of war, right? We now have Turnus and his Aristeia in full. He burns the towers that are there. The towers come down, and two young Trojans try and get away, Helnor and Lycus. Helnor leaps at the enemy into the enemy's center. Lycus runs. Turnus will catch him and jack him. We have all kinds of war cries that are going on, rising everywhere at 6:45. And then we have the list of kills, just like we had it in the Iliad. We have an interesting mention of Pravenius, who is wounded, and he's called an idiot because he reaches for his wound and in the process lowers his shield, and then this kills him. We have Mezentius' hissing sling, which will split his enemy's skull and splay him out headfirst on the bank of sand at line 670. We have Ascanius with his very first shot. He will take the first time in war, the flying arrow he'd saved till now for wild game, we're told, and he shoots. And sure enough, he hits Numinus, and it says, look at the heroes who'd seize our brides in battle. What god drove you to Italy? Now this is Numinus, who is going to taunt, right, all of them. So he's out there around the ramparts, and he starts taunting them, and he says, what god drove you to Italy? What insanity? No sons of Atreus here, no spinner of tales Ulysses. In other words, we're not like those Greeks. We're far tougher. We're rugged stock. In fact, he even talks about how we train our sons by sticking them in cold water and that kind of thing. We think about those young samurai warriors that are trained in the Bushido code by their parents, right, when they're very, very young. We're tough. In other words, no lame old age can cripple our high spirits, line 695. Sap our vigor. No, we tramp our helmets down on our gray heads. We tamp our helmets down on our gray heads. And our great joy is always to haul fresh booty home and live off all we seize. In other words, we are tough. The implication is, but you with your saffron braided dress, your flashy purple, you live for lazing, lost in your dancing, your delight. You're not real men, in other words. And then it's at that point, Ascanius has had enough. He prays to Jove and he shoots. And we're told that when he shoots, of course, this is kind of like Paris killing Achilles, right? We're told that when he prays, the Father heard, and on the left, this is the way that the Romans will interpret good, not bad omens, right? And he shoots, and it goes through Remulus's head with a vicious hiss. It rends his empty temples, and he says it. Go on, mock our courage with high and mighty talk. Here's the reply the Pythagoreans give twice enslaved, return to you Rutilians. That's all he says. The Trojans echo back with a roar of joy. And we're told by chance Apollo, god of the flowing hair, enthroned on a cloud in the broad sweeping sky, was glancing down, and he calls to Ascanius, and he's flushed with triumph, and he says, bravo, my boy, bravo, your newborn courage. That's the path to the stars. It's a famous line. That's the path to the stars. In other words, being a good warrior, son of the gods. You'll father gods to come. All fated wars to come will end in peace justly under Ascanius' future sons. Troy can never hold you. And Apollo then will change, take on the form of Butes, and this is an old man, reminding us, of course, of the way that Athena plays the same game in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Comes down and he basically says, that's enough. It's interesting that in the Aeneid, often, humans, don't recognize they're talking to gods until after the fact, when they kind of fly away or whatever. I mean, we saw this earlier with Turnus. He knew it was Iris because of the rainbow. Have the same thing. It's when Apollo flies away, they hear the quivers of the arrows in his quiver, and they know that it's a god. And so they protect Ascanius. They get him out of the tempest of war. We then have Pandarus and Bytus, who are going to open the gates of the ramparts so that they can go out and fight. They invite the challenge. We have some serious slaughter here that takes place. The Rutilians will come in. They will speed to the gate. All kinds of killing happens. And we have all kinds of Trojan deaths. We have as well then the swarming of the Latins who will be coming on. We have Turnus, who is he seems almost like Pyrrhus in the telling of the fall of Troy. And he goes inside of the walls. And then they close the doors. So we're told at line 820, they shut out all the comrades now, outside the ramparts, facing an uphill battle. Turnus shuts in many others, ushering fighters home. As in they rush, along with himself, the crazy fool. Not to have spotted Turnus charging in with the crowds. And all unwittingly shut him up inside the walls, like a claw-mewed tiger among some helpless flock. Again, we think of Pyrrhus. The irony will be that once he's inside, we're told, if he just turn around and open the door of the gates, it's over. The Trojans lose. That's not what he does. Instead, we have Pandarus, who will say to him, no palace here, you're a dowry from Amata. Look, no fortress, right, hugging your native Turnus. What you see is your enemies you can't escape. We're told Turnus replies at line 835 with a smile in the middle of the battle. It's a nice touch. On with it now, he says. If you have the backbone in you, let's trade blows. You'll tell the ghost of Priam you found an Achilles, even here. Then they fight. Juno saves, by the way, Turnus. Turnus kills Pandarus. Then the Trojans begin to panic. And at line 853, we're told they're running, right? The conquering hero is smashing the gate bolts. And he's out. Mad lust for carnage drives him against his foes. We have a list of all of the kills that he makes, reminding us of similar kinds of lists in the Iliad when Hector kills so many of the Greeks. He kills the great singer Creusus, and then the great warrior of the Trojans, Mestidas. He will shout at line 880 because all the men are running. All the Trojans are running. They're behind their walls, and only one man to kill, and they're running. Where are you heading? Where are you flying now? Mestidas will say, what other walls, what other ramparts have you got, my countrymen? Can one man, penned up in your fortress on all sides, spread such slaughter through the city? Send such a rout of first-rate fighters down to death and never pay the price? You, feckless, craven, have you no pity, no shame? This kind of insulting we're familiar with right from the Iliad. For your wretched land, your gods of old, for great Aeneas. And then we're told that ignites them. And we've seen this in the Iliad, right? At moments when warriors are convinced it's time to give up, usually somebody stands up and says, through an insult, how dare you? That ignites them, stiffens their spines, and closing ranks, they halt as Turnus pulls away from the melee, heading step by step for the banks where the river rings the camp. Right? Two times he attempts to try and fight through them. 2 times he's put off. Finally, we're told at line 900 or so that Jove has had enough of this. He sends Iris to Juno to say, enough. We've had enough of this fighting. Turnus has to stop. The sweat, we're told at line 915, goes rippling over Turnus's entire body, rivering down black with filth. He can't catch his breath, gasping, weak knees quaking, bone tired, until at last he dives headfirst, plunging into the river, armor and all. And Tiber swept him into its yellow tide, catching him as he came, then bore him up in its soothing waves, and bathing away the carnage, gave the elated fighter back to his friends. So, in other words, he swims across the Tiber and he's saved and he gets to go back to his friends. Now, you can think about this at 3a already. What are the texts that you know of where the villain fights, has a great fight, but in the end has to run away or has to leave, and we know that it's going to come back? And of course, this is how the poem will end here in a couple of more books for us, when Aeneas and Turnus will have their famous face-to-face. All right, let's hurry now and go through levels 2 and 3. At 2a, well, obviously the importance or the value of a friendship cannot be overstated, right? That is to say, I've got your back. The Narcissus Aurelius line, the storyline is powerful. Of course, along with that, the love of a mother for a son, Euryalus' mom, that is compelling stuff. We think about Achilles' mother Thetis, don't we? And the way in which she wails the idea that her son is going to die, and she knows it, and how sad she's going to be. Of course, there's another message here. Before victory, often there has to be a defeat, right? We got serious defeat before we got the victory that's coming. See, notice how we know when we read the Iliad that the Greeks are going to win, but for most of the Iliad, it seems like the Trojans are winning. Some of you said that. What is up with this poem? It's like the Trojans seem to be winning the whole time, but we know they're going to lose, right? We know that Hector is going to die. The same is true here. We know that Aeneas, in the end, is going to kill Turnus. We know that, right? The poet's going to tell us that already, okay? But you've got to have a lot of defeat before you get to your victory. At level 2b, the symbolism is probably self-evident. I mean, think about it. You have the old man Nicias, you have young man Euryalus, and they're close and fast friends. Again, like we said, we'll have in the next book, in book 10, we're going to have Aeneas with Pallas there. Older men taking care of younger men. This has been one of those motifs all the way back to the beginning of our time with the Iliad, right? The irony, of course, is that Euryalus will take the helmet, armor, like we've seen so many times in the Iliad, and he'll put it on at night. And this, of course, in many ways is kind of the symbolism as well of the Achilles heel, isn't it? It's the one thing Euryalus doesn't know that he shouldn't do, is put a helmet on in the nighttime, because the moonlight will shine off of it, and that's how they get caught, right? The other irony, of course, is that Turnus could have finished this whole thing if he just turned around and opened the gates up and let all of his soldiers in, but instead, he wants to fight, right? The other interesting irony is that the turning of the boats into nymphs and swimming away like dolphins is wrongly interpreted by Turnus. I mean, you would think that something like that, he would say, you know what, I think I better rethink what's going on with my wanting to fight with these guys. They clearly have the gods on their side, not the way it goes down. At level 3a, well, we mentioned it already, the Iliad in book 10. The Diomedes Odysseus night raid ends with Dolon being beheaded, but the whole thing is kind of like a lark. In fact, it ends, you'll remember, book 10, with the Greek troops all kind of laughing about the fact that these guys went out and stole those horses, and it was really all about, of course, Time and Kleos, the Scooby Snacks and Glory, right? Here we have something quite different, right? In the wanting to get out and go and find Aeneas and Nicias and Euryalus, and of course their death is going to make this story really tragic. Notice as well that in many ways Turnus is the equivalent of Hector attacking the Greeks. But the irony, of course, is that Turnus is himself, you're right, attacking, if he is playing the role of Hector, but Hector was Trojan, right? Now, I like to think of it more like the villain. You got to have the villain, right? In the Odyssey, of course, you have the story of the mother and son of Penelope and Telemachus. right? Telemachus desiring to telling mother, let me grow up, in code language, right? Euryalus doesn't say goodbye to his mother either, as we said. What are your favorite texts of warfare? Another 3A question, where a villain gets jacked. Think about almost every Jackie Chan film that you've ever watched, where a villain gets jacked, but then he gets away so that we can have the penultimate scene at the very end, escaping to fight on later. It's a famous one, right? Famous motif. Finally, at level 3B, this is an interesting question. I mean, we enjoyed this when we were talking about Diomedes and Odysseus in Iliad 10. You can go back and look at that lecture again if you want, where you have Nicias and Euryalus. They're killing slaughtering sleeping men. I mean, the poem calls it a massacre because that's what it is. It's just slaughter of defenseless men sleeping. Do you see this as heroic? Is this acceptable? This question, thinking about Nicias and Euryalus, who has your back? That is to say, who is the Euryalus in your life if you are the Nicias? Or the other way around, if you're the older, who's the younger that looks up to you? Do you have somebody else's back, in other words? Do you have a Turnus in your life? See, now I can ask that question. Do you have somebody in your life that just seems to kind of plague you, and no matter what you do, you cannot defend yourself against such a violent kind of person? Maybe not physically violent, maybe other kinds. Speaking of violence now, let's get on to Book 10. The struggle and the war and the tragic loss, especially of young life. We'll think here about Pallas, no question. And, of course, we'll continue to play very much like the Iliad game, where a lot of people have got to die. It's a really disturbing element of our poem. No question. Thank you for hanging on. I appreciate it.